544 million years ago, a geological period known as the Paleozoic Era began. A large sea covered much of the United States, including what is now Illinois. In this sea lived a vast number of microscopic plants and animals called plankton. This microscopic plankton drifted on or near the surface of the water and became so numerous that it could actually be seen with the naked eye. Throughout the Paleozoic era, the sea was also alive with trilobites, corals, crinoids, brachiopods, and a host of other marine plants and animals that were evolving over many millions of years. A trilobite was a strange-looking little creature. Small grooves divided its body and hard-segmented shell into 3 vertical parts. Its head was covered by a semicircular shield. Many kinds of trilobites lived in the seas that covered Illinois. Coral, which still exists today, came in many different sizes, shapes, and colors. The coral polyps were simple animals that were able to take calcium out of salt water and convert it into a rock-like shelter in which they lived. Crinoids anchored themselves to the seafloor with a root-like structure that supported a long stalk or column. On top of this stalk was a cup-like cavity which formed a protective case for a flower-like structure that was used to catch tiny particles of food as they drifted by. Brachiopods were clam-like animals that lived on the seafloor. Their 2-piece dorsal and ventral shells enclosed and protected their soft body parts, just like clams and oysters today. Although during this time Illinois was covered by the sea, other parts of the world were exposed as land. As rivers, wind, rain, avalanches, and ice movements eroded the surrounding landscapes, tiny particles called clastic sediments were carried into the sea where the billions of tiny sea creatures lived. All organisms on Earth contain carbon. Billions of tiny plankton can contain quite a large amount of carbon. As these numerous life forms in the sea of the Paleozoic era died, their remains settled to the deep sea floor and became covered with the mud, sand, and sediment from the eroding mountains and surrounding areas. If these dead plankton and other sea creatures were buried quickly on the deep sea floor, the sediment would protect them from being exposed to oxygen, which is necessary for decay or decomposition. If the dead organisms don't decay, the carbon in their remains can be preserved. If a layer has a particularly large amount of carbon, we tend to call it organic rich. In Illinois, several thin organic rich layers were deposited, but the thickest, and by far the most important one, was deposited in the middle of the Paleozoic era, about 360 to 350 million years ago. Can you picture this scene? For perhaps another 100 million years, sediments continued to bury our organic rich layer. By now, it was the last of the Paleozoic era, and the layers of sediments on the seafloor have become thousands upon thousands of feet thick. The weight and depth of all this rock created immense pressure and heat that began to affect the buried organic rich layers. About this time, the seas were leaving Illinois, and no more sediments were being deposited. Even so, the heat and pressure continued to work on these buried sediments and were responsible for slowly changing the inorganic layers into sedimentary rock. The rare organic-rich layers were changed into what geologists call source rock, and it is only in these source rocks where the dead organic material can slowly change into hydrocarbons, which are compounds containing only hydrogen and carbon. Can you picture this scene? A few million years later, or around 248 million years ago, the Mesozoic era began. It was the age of reptiles. Illinois was now dry land and would never again be covered by the sea. From that time through the entire Mesozoic era, and through the entire Cenozoic era, all the way until today, the animals that plodded, walked, and flew across Illinois had no idea that pressure and heat were continuing to act on the layers of sedimentary rock deep beneath their feet. The effects of the heat and pressure over all this time formed many layers of sedimentary rock under the Illinois area, including the organic rich source rock. Much of the water that was in the ancient sea is now in the pore spaces of these sedimentary rocks. The remaining water evaporated or was pushed into areas where seas or oceans now exist. For over 250 million years, temperatures ranging from 150 to 300 degrees Fahrenheit have cooked the organic materials in the buried sediments, causing a complex chemical change, creating oil and natural gas. Molecule by molecule, the oil and gas was pushed out of the source rock and migrated into porous reservoir rocks in other layers. It is in these reservoir rocks that we find oil today. Can you picture this scene?